So this talk is probably a little less touchy-feely than my one the other day, which is confusing because I don't really do much that's touchy-feely. The question is, and it's the flip side of the layoff thing, right? So a round of layoffs or multiple round of layoffs are a failure of management, but maybe it's a strategic direction thing, or maybe we're not getting the right people, or maybe people do empire building. I don't know what it is, right? But the question you got to go back to is what percentage of the people in the company deliver the bulk of the value? And originally I had this at 80%, but some people would argue that a very small percentage of the people in a company deliver, 80, 90 or higher percentage of the value in the company. And so my question is, how do you manage value over cost, right? And I'm not just saying, how do you acquire the most valuable people or train or build the most valuable people? And is their performance so much higher that the cost doesn't matter? That's kind of been the argument for a while, right? And so hiring and growing the right people. And I'm wondering if you fail to hire and grow the right people, right? Not just retain people, but the right people and people who are interested, people who will grow into what they need to be, or you can get people that are already motivated. Is this the failure that is the tinder for layoffs, right? Like if you have not only do you not know what business you're in, but if it turns out you can't get control of the hiring process or you fill slots because you're worried, is that really the thing that guarantees that down the road you're going to have layoffs? And so that's that quality over quantity thing. And really, I'm starting to wonder if if companies over a certain size, how do they maintain that quality over quantity, right? Because the numbers just become large enough that every small hire is noise, right? So I thought there were a couple studies out there, and I'm going to show you a curve in a minute, that the results are remarkably consistent across industries, that we do not follow a bell curve for performance in organizations. We instead follow a power law curve. And what that actually means, the power law curve says, well, first of all, the bell curve is wrong. People don't work like a bell curve. A small number of people deliver an outsized proportion of the productivity. And man, you see this a lot in the software industry and in other industries, right? On this curve, there's a small number of people who provide a high level of performance, right? And then there's a large, really small, like you look at professional athletes, I'm just going to pick basketball, right? There are a very small number of people that can drive the entire organization if they can get some pretty good people to work with them. And it turns out that engineering and other disciplines are a lot like basketball, right? So there are a small number of hyper performers. There's a larger, oh man, I'm missing a double quote there, I'll fix it. There's a large pool of good performers, right? And then there's a small number of low performers. And so what it ends up meaning if you're not on the bell curve is that basically only 10 to 15% of the people in an organization are above average. And that's because if you're talking about the total performance delivery capability of an organization, and you figured out what percentage of people were above that middle value, the average value, not the median, right? But the average, it turns out 10 to 15% of the people really are above average. And some of them are way above average. And then the bulk of the population is actually below average, right? And that may be fine. And then you've got a really small number that are really below average, right? And below average isn't bad here, right? It's not that they're bad. It's just because if you look at the average performance, the bulk of the people are going to fall far below that amount, right? And so that's just something, it's like weird math, right? Like with the bell curve, it's like half the people are above average and half are below average. And it's like maybe we'll skew the curve a little bit. No, this says that the outstanding performers are a small number. They account for the bulk of the performance for the entire company. And therefore, you end up with most people below and then a very small number of people very far below. And that's just the way the curve works. If you look at sports, you look at a lot of knowledge industries, you look at what people claim about programmers, you look at other things. That's the curve. And you just got to be aware of that curve. And what that means, though, is what are you hiring for? What kind of people are you training people to be, right? It turns out you got to have the pool of high performers. So one of the things that people, you see this in the software industry. A lot of people say the best engineer is 10x better than the average, and the power curve kind of leads you in that direction. So, it appears to be true with any metrics people have generated that those top engineers, the top athletes, the top whatever, are significantly higher than average. And if you don't end up acquiring those people, then you have to take a lot of people to try and get the same work done, right? 10 to 15% are above average, everybody else is below. Wow. So if you could hire those people, where would you be at? If you can train those people, you can grow those people, you can make people feel like that they can fit into that slot. So I think the nut of this really is you got to hire on the power law curve. You can't hire for the bell curve. And that means you can get by with a lot fewer people, less filler, right? So one of the questions is there a maximum company size beyond which you are guaranteed to be inefficient? And it's because you can't hire enough of the best. I mean, you don't need as many, and you could pay more. And if you look at that performance curve, paying somebody 2 or 3x to be one of the top performers, if they really are, probably is an advantage. Less overhead, less communication, and their output is significantly better. Or if you can grow people to be that. So this is more of a supposition, right? Maybe that's why companies early on like Amazon and other places did really amazingly well, right? They were small enough, or they were organized small enough that they could hire on that curve, or they could grow people on that curve. So I'm not really sure. I'm open to opinions. What do other people think? Is there a size beyond which organizations are guaranteed to be inefficient because they can't load up the power curve, and then they end up with a lot of people with a lot of cross communication? I don't know. What do you think?